Blessings to everybody from Chithurst Buddhist Monastery in the UK. I have some free time this morning before I go over to visit my father at his home nearby. So I'll just send you some reflections and give you words of encouragement in your practice. Staying at Chithurst the last 2 days has brought up some recollections of this monastery in particular. When I began practicing Buddhism more wholeheartedly, I spent 3 months as an anagarika in Wat Nana Chat in Thailand. That was my first taste of Buddhist monasticism back in the early 80s. Then I returned to England to finish a degree for about 10 months and then went back to Thailand. But during those 10 months, I made many visits and stayed a few times at Chithurst Monastery, which was still very new in those days. It was the only monastery in our tradition in the UK. And it's a good reflection to see how well it's developed now materially, the buildings, facilities, the grounds, and then spiritually, the practice of the monks, nuns, lay people. It's very heartwarming and inspiring to see how over 40 years a monastery has developed and changed. And you're probably all familiar with those BBC documentaries, The Mindful Way and then The Buddha Comes to Sussex, which shows you some of the early challenges that the Sangha faced here and some of the doubts local people had. And those all seem like a dream away now. And the monastery is well established in the community. Many of those doubts hopefully have disappeared and people are getting on with their practice as they should be. But I remember in those early days when I used to come and stay and practice here, the community was very new. So there were a lot of new monks, nuns, novices, and new to England and the local community, it was a new thing. So there were a lot of doubts, uncertainties. There was also a lot of inconveniences and challenges. Many people living together in a house or 2 houses, a small house for the nuns, big house for the males, monastics. The facilities were limited and they were only just building their first kuti. I'd come back from Thailand, so I was very happy to offer a little bit of help with that first kuti in whatever way I could. I had no skills as a lay visitor, but I had faith and was willing to help. And I saw the need for kutis here in the forest. And because I'd been staying in Thailand, practicing in a kuti at Wat Nana Chat and benefiting greatly from that, I realized how important it would be to the monastery here. So luckily nowadays they have many kutis and I'm benefiting from that as well today, staying in this beautiful kuti, which you can't see, but it's just to my side. But a monastery is a place for building barami, they say, developing those qualities, internal qualities in the mind that support our practice for ultimate peace and liberation from the causes of suffering. Whether it's in the early stages of actually establishing the monastery or like now, 40 years after its beginnings, just as a place of practice. A monastery is a place to develop barami, develop the practice on the outside and on the inside. So on the outside, we have the practice of dana, generosity, the laity supporting in whatever way they can, and then the sangha looking after the place, developing it physically, materially. And then we have on the inside our own individual spiritual practice, but that also supports the other people in the community. And you see how just as a monastery is developed little by little, many, many people have contributed to this monastery over the years. Small acts of kindness, generosity and sacrifice, whether it's small donations of time, knowledge and skills, money, food, all through the practice, coming and participating, joining in meditation and chanting, learning the Dhamma, listening to the Dhamma. You can see how all these little acts of goodness join together to create a monastery. And in our mind, it's the same. You know, the little acts of goodness we develop and put effort into developing every day start to develop momentum and change us for the better as human beings. And just as a monastery starts to grow, then a human being can grow and quite naturally, organically become something very beautiful, inspiring, and a benefit for the world. And a monastery is, you can see, it's an invaluable asset to the world community because it's a place where people can come and practice training in the Vinaya, which is, you know, the Buddhist monastic code, which helps us to get to Nibbana. It can train in generosity, train in keeping precepts, and train in mindfulness, wise reflection, and developing insight into the deeper truths that ultimately liberate our mind. It's a place that all that can take place. It's conducive, it's peaceful, it's quiet. At the moment I'm in isolation because I'm a visitor, and because of the coronavirus pandemic, they want me in isolation, but I really can't complain because in isolation, I'm in a beautiful kuti, in a beautiful forest on my own with plenty of time to practice and talk to you. So that's, even coronavirus has some fringe benefits for monastics. I don't think any of us are complaining about getting a bit of quiet time to practice and reflect on the Dhamma. But a monastery is like that. It's a place, it's a sanctuary, and also a supportive environment. But then there's on the inside as well, what we do, how we use the place, how we practice. I remember in the early days, much of the community was kind of supported and pulled along, particularly by Luang Por Sumedho, who had come over from Thailand to teach and begin the project. And his strength of mind, you might say his barami, which was already well developed, but he was no doubt still practicing, still developing his barami. That seemed to pull everyone along. He would give regular reflections and talks, encouragement to everybody. He was like the solid center of Chithurst Monastery in those days. I remember particularly one of his favorite phrases, maybe it still is today. In those days, it was, you know, this is the way things are, which is a very Buddhist reflection, which kind of brings everything together, encourages you to practice mindfulness and awareness of the present moment, whatever's arising in your body, your mind, the situation you're in, where you are. It's just this way, this is the way things are. And that was such a valuable teaching, which you also hear often said in Thailand as well. It's such a valuable reflection for monastics, especially building a new monastery where things are inconvenient, there's challenges, learning to live together, learning to make do with little support, learning to make do with the limited facilities. You reflect, this is just the way things are, rather than reacting with your aversion or complaints or always being dreaming about the perfect monastery and when will the monastery be finished. You just get on with your practice and reflect, this is the way things are. So my recollections of Chithurst in those days, the early 80s, was we were always walking around reflecting, this is the way things are. And it works. It's a very simple wisdom teaching, but brings you back to the practice of mindfulness as well as wisdom and insight into what's going on in your body and mind in the present moment, which is the place of practice. I can remember in the early days when I used to visit, I was only a student, so I didn't have much money, but I had a friend who worked in a whole food shop, and I quickly realized I could buy a sack of oats, a sack of nuts, some dry goods that would be useful for the monastery, because all the cooking was done on site here. And today, this very day, it's the same because of the COVID virus, and there's no outside visitors. But in those days, there was very little dana coming in of fresh cooked food, although people did support the monastery, of course. So the cooking was done, and I remember one day I turned up about 7 in the morning, and the kitchen anagarikas were saying, oh, we've got so little food today. I said, well, I've got a big tin of honey, I've got a big sack of oats, a big sack of nuts, a big sack of currants, I can make flapjacks. So I quickly learned how to make flapjacks for 30. And then I repeated that on another occasion, similar situation. I said, oh, very little food today. I said, I can make pizza. So I learned to make pizza for 30, learned to make flapjacks for 30. And no one complained about the food. How good it was, I don't know, but they all ate it. So what can you say? It's good enough. And that's how it is in a monastery where support is still new. The place is being built. Everyone just mucks in, does what they can. And you make merit like that. You make barami, even just cooking food for 30 people, you're making a lot of barami. The patience, the wisdom you need to reflect on how to prepare a meal for that number of people, what you need, the energy you need, and so on. These qualities are no different from what we develop when we practice meditation. And if you can see that, then it helps when you maybe have to do more work or more do these sort of things when you'd rather be sitting in a cookie meditating. You can't overlook the fact you're actually developing many of the same qualities just in a simple act of dana, of cooking a meal. So at night we would hear a talk. Often Lumpur Sumedho would teach a talk every night, give a talk every night. And again, coming back to this theme, this is the way things are. As human beings, we have to accept our karma that we've made so far in our life. We've experienced the results of our past karma, some good, some bad. And that's an ongoing process of cause and result. So if we've come to Buddhism and we're learning to practice meditation, your starting point is you have to accept the way things are, the way your body is, your health, the way you are physically, the way you are mentally and your mental health. Your karmic accumulations, some good, some not so good. You have to accept this is the way things are. This is your starting point. And Lumpur Sumedho would always bring the Sangha back to that reflection to help deal with the natural tendency to look elsewhere for happiness, to be idealistic, caught into the imagination, how to make the perfect situation to practice the perfect monastery and so on, which is quite natural in a situation that is challenging, but it's something we have to learn how to deal with. And these wise reflections help us. Just bringing your mind back when you are meditating, your mind is running off. You sit meditation for an hour, your mind will run away 100 times in that hour. And you have to keep bringing it back to the breath or to the meditation object you're developing or to the use of wise reflection and insight. And a mind that first doesn't want to stay in the present moment. So you bring up this reflection. This is just the way things are. I'm going to carry on practicing, bringing up mindfulness, turning my attention back to the breath. The mind runs away again. I'm going to bring it back. And we say, this is where you make barami. Just as the Sangha here in the early days didn't run away when they got criticism or some of the locals didn't understand what they were doing. Now the monastery has grown into something very beautiful and successful. Your own mindfulness practice and meditation practice, development of the Eightfold Path is just the same. If you don't run away, you don't give up, you just keep going, keep bringing your mind back to the present moment, establishing mindfulness. You keep bringing up right effort, letting go of the unwholesome states of mind, cultivating the wholesome and skillful states of mind. And you keep doing that, eventually you get results. You experience more of a sense of well-being, more peace, more self-control, and importantly, more understanding. This is the way things are. And this reflection is both a temporary or a short-term reflection that helps you to let go of unpleasant situations arising or unpleasant feelings in body and mind arising. You have to accept this is the way things are, even though I don't like it. This is the way things are. Or in a more long-term sense, you have to accept the development of a human mind takes time. Nobody gets quick results, easy results in their practice. Everyone has to develop these 10 paramis, taking time, developing patient effort, developing wisdom through wise reflection, developing kindness, developing renunciation, generosity, and that determination just to keep with it, keep with the practice. If you don't give up, then the good results gradually come through. How fast, how slow, it doesn't matter. You don't know, you can't control that necessarily. But as long as you keep going, you can see little by little all the good that you do comes together, just like a monastery grows up from all the good little acts of goodness and kindness that people do over the years makes a monastery. Our practice is the same. Particularly in the early days, you could see how just having that sense of purpose, like we're very lucky here at Chithurst. It's the one monastery that Luang Por Chah, our teacher, visited. And he, who believes, an arahant, a fully enlightened, fully awakened being who has inspired so many people to practice the Dhamma around the world. He actually visited here in the early days. So just that fact alone is a great inspiration. Even remembering it now, for me, brings up joy, rapture. The fact that an arahant came out of Asia, traveled to England, set foot in a place that is now a practicing monastery. Just that memory alone is such a wholesome, joyful memory. Brings up very good states of mind. And in a sort of way, if nothing else happens in your life, just the fact that you've been able to visit a place or where there's an arahant or an arahant has been and practiced, kind of gives immense value and purpose to your life. We have to channel that back into our own practice now, but it's a good starting point. So Chithurst is a very special place in the Buddhist world and in the world as a whole, because Luang Por Chah came here, he practiced, he taught here, if only briefly, and set in motion something very special, very great. And Luang Por Sumedho carried on the teachings and the practice of Ajahn Chah. And then all the Sangha. And nowadays, look at the Sangha that were here in the early days. We have Ajahn Amaro at Amaravati, Ajahn Sujito, Ajahn Koriko here, Ajahn Munindo in Harnham, Luang Por Kema Dhammo up in Warwick, and around the world also. Many monks who have practiced at Chithurst in the early days have gone on to become teachers and abbots in their own right. Now they're all established in their practice. Their barami has developed to a good level and they continue their practice. When they started, they probably were full of doubts, like everyone. When you begin practicing, you don't know a lot. You might think you know a lot, but you don't. Some monks and nuns are plagued by doubt. That's normal. Some are more confident, some are overconfident. But in the beginning, that's not tested yet. You haven't got real barami. The barami develops through time, through the practice. And if you keep doing the practice, well, these are the qualities that become deeply ingrained in your character, in your citta, we say. And why do people develop deep states of samadhis? Because they are willing to keep practicing, putting effort into that. They don't give up, and they gain the understanding what they need to do to let go of obstacles and attachments in their mind, to develop the states of serenity and calm. They keep doing it with effort and energy until it's done, until they've developed some samadhi. Insight is the same. All of us begin with these simple reflections like, this is the way things are. The world is an imperfect place. It's full of dukkha. Body and minds are full of dukkha. The world around us is full of dukkha. But this is the way things are. Just that reflection, just a simple thought you bring up during a moment when you may be suffering is enough to help you let go of that experience of suffering, or at least be at peace with it. And if you keep developing that insight, which is at first maybe just remembering this teaching, thinking about it, eventually you might get to the point where your mind is calm, serene, mindfulness is established, and it becomes maybe a non-verbal teaching where you're just observing, this is the way things are. Thoughts, phenomena that arise and pass away. Memories, however good or bad, arise and pass away. They're not self. Mental states are not self. They arise according to causes and conditions, and then they pass away. Feelings are impermanent and not self. Feelings in your body are pleasant, unpleasant, and sometimes neither pleasant nor unpleasant. They arise and pass away. This is the way things are. And for the mind that is well trained, the Bharami has developed, that becomes the normal way of viewing experience. Things arise and pass away all the time in your experience, and you don't cling. You don't form false perceptions, misunderstandings about the world. You just know this is the way it is, or this is the way things are. And ultimately, that can become a liberating insight in your mind. But you have to nurture it, give it time. So maybe I'll just say this much today. Encourage you all to continue with your practice. I'm practicing here at Chithurst Monastery and also going across to see my father, who's very close to the end of his life. But this is the way things are for me. You know, I have to accept that. All good things come to an end. My father has lived a very good life. His mind is peaceful, but now he does have quite a lot of discomfort. Not sure how long that will last now. We all have our own karma we have to accept. So family ties are part of our karma. Accepting the separation from the ones we love and like is part of our karma. But this is the way things are. And I'm sure you all have similar experiences you have to face. So maybe use this reflection when you need to. This is the way things are, and let that just sit in your mind. Let the sense of dissatisfaction, discontent, suffering settle down. You let go of it, let it settle, and just accept this is the way things are. And your mind can become peaceful, whether for a moment or fully peaceful. We shall see. But for now, I'll wish you all well, encourage you all to keep up your practice, and I'll talk to you again when I can. May the goodness of the Triple Gem guide you, protect you, bless you, and may you prosper in the practice.